So essentially, you have like these RC cars you can drive. You have a stick, and you can stick of chalk, but you can have different colors. So what you can do is that have each car, like they would just create their own colored line, and then if people are familiar with the game Tron, and there's a movie that's going to be coming out soon in 2025, or no, some years later. I'm sorry. Like if your opposing car hits the line that you created, then like they're dead, so they're out of the game.
Yeah.
So maybe this might be a little fun game. Some kids can just go out there. It could be a fun summer activity.
Sup, my Pample mates, it's Mike Check Mike.
Hey, it's Eugene.
Hey, I'm Jonathan.
And welcome to the show with candid conversations and creative chaos. So as usual, we'll start with our first segment, the big question, where we'll take on challenging and conceptual questions before going to our Thanks Mom segments, where we'll eventually take 2 words, through Mom, aka ChatGPT, to ideate around and come up with some wacky ideas for y'all. So for today's theme, suspense, I was thinking of focusing around: is remote work failing because managers secretly don't trust employees, or because employees aren't trustworthy without supervisors?
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, loaded question for sure. Remote work's become a thing in the fairly recent history, right? 2019 and so on. And now there's been a lot of remote work as well. And I think we've been on kind of both sides of the equation. And so it's something that affects us and the world at large, I guess. So, why shy away from that topic? Let's dig into it. So maybe to set us off in some kind of direction, how about we tackle if employees are actually less productive at home, or whether it's more of an issue of managers mistaking visibility and busy work for genuine productivity?
There is like a spectrum in which I think a lot of people live within when answering this kind of question. I would say there are employees that could be less productive at home. And I can speak to a lot of this just from my own personal experiences and from what I've observed from fellow coworkers. Some employees could be less productive at home, and there are managers who do try to make sure everyone's busy all the time. And I want to first address the employees part first. Sometimes when some employees have like these, they have unique living circumstances where maybe sometimes they're sharing where they live with another person, whether they're still living with their family or they're just roommates with another person. I think sometimes for some employees, it's really difficult to set up healthy boundaries and just have healthy communications with people around them, especially if you are still living with your family, with your mom or father. Sometimes there are sometimes unhealthy dynamics that could get in the way with work. Sometimes the people around you may not be able to respect your time and space with your responsibilities outside of the house. Like if you're just working at a aerospace company or a business firm or something like that, sometimes people around you may not understand how much you value your job, or sometimes, so to speak. So that sometimes just kind of it hinders some employees from being able to actually do what they need to do because they lack that time and space and just boundaries to get things done. And for some managers, I think I could also speak to this from what I've observed from other people as well. There are some managers who they do have like unhealthy amounts of cynicism and fear of their team. Maybe these managers have just gotten burned in the past from less than great coworkers. But what tends to happen for some managers is that they tend to build this fear that, if I'm not watching my team working in front of me, then they're not going to work. And for a lot of times, some of these managers, it's easier for them to see their team working because it's easier for them to assume if whatever they're working on is for the job and not for something else. Like obviously, if you see your team just scrolling through Instagram, like they're just on their phone on the job, you can tell that they're not working. But you can't make that kind of observation when everyone's working remotely and everyone's just talking to each other on Slack or on Discord or on Teams. Like you don't know what's going on. So there is a level of paranoia that some managers tend to create, and it does create a lot of unhealthy dynamics with and it infringes on work and life balance as well, for sure.
I think one thing I'd like to add is that you're totally right that even if you're kind of peering over people's shoulders, or let's say you're just looking at a room and everyone's on their computers in front of you and they seem to be working, that doesn't necessarily mean they're working. I think that even when people are in the office, if they don't want to work, they can find a way to not work and keep themselves productive. Like I definitely know, there's times where like coworkers will be in the office and they'll just be chatting with each other or like getting to know each other, or just like killing time, like running out the clock. And you could do that at home. You could do that in the office. I know not going to name any names, but there's been like people who have done internships and they'll tell me like, oh yeah, like they didn't give me a bunch of work. So like I was just there 8 hours a day, like working on other stuff that is completely unrelated to the job.
Yeah. Or you have the person staring at the screen and wiggling the mouse every couple of minutes, but it's the same empty Word doc showing on the screen.
Yeah. And I think it is sort of scary as a manager, because even if the productivity numbers are good, you have to kind of think to yourself like, oh, how much better could they be if I had everyone in front of me and, I was forcing them to work all the time. It's sort of like that expression, like seeing is believing. Like people, there's an element of trust that has to happen whenever you have remote workers that necessarily you don't need to have when you're looking at them, even though that's sort of a flawed perspective, because people in the office can be as productive as they want to be. Yeah,
that's true. I mean, there's kind of maybe a grass is greener sort of syndrome where it's like, oh, well, what could be if we went the other way or back to return in office? I mean, I agree. It's also kind of a question of how you track, I guess, the metrics you choose and the incentives that those create. So if you track things like time spent, let's say you're remote, there's been a lot of debate around software, for example, that tracks your login times and different activities. And those kind of metrics might feel tangible because there's something that you're actively measuring, but they don't necessarily correlate really well to productivity. And I feel like those metrics don't necessarily yield results, which probably hurts the manager's trust. And at the same time, it's also a bit intrusive. So it probably doesn't go a long way towards creating the employee trust. And then you do have you kind of had an interesting point with like sort of working from home and sort of the boundaries. I mean, that was well exemplified during the pandemic where, you had people sharing videos, for example, of their work environment sometimes, and you would see the partner, a parent, children coming in, just a lot of examples of not well-defined boundaries. And that was just kind of exacerbated because you were all living in the same house at that period of time. And those dynamics may still exist today, but because they're not as, again, exacerbated, people may not notice them or kind of dismiss them a little more, but that doesn't mean that they're not still there.
Yeah.
But you do have some type of tasks that flourish in environments. I'm thinking coding, for example. I think that one that speaks to me at least. Sometimes having that sort of quiet environment when you're not in an office, it does help. Tasks that involve a lot of, call it introspective moments, I guess, such as coding or design work, oftentimes flourish in a bit of a more quiet, less interruption prone environment, which a lot of times the office is not great for, right? You always have that colleague barging in, your door's closed, they still barge in no matter what the sign says, and then all those interruptions can be disruptive. Mm-hmm. So we talked about managers as well, like in your other point too, just to kind of not forget that one and bounce off of it. And a lot of times when you think of managers, you kind of think of a person who's senior and maybe a person who's older as well. And that maybe brings up sort of another question of whether this lack of trust is more of a generational issue essentially, or whether even younger managers tend to struggle with this issue of working remotely.
Yeah, I think it's not a generational issue per se. I think sometimes young managers are very eager to prove themselves, to like improve the productivity of the company and their group, and that kind of desire to get results could cause them to kind of have the grass is greener syndrome. Where like, oh, but if only I had people in front of me that I could make work. And that's not true for every young manager, nor is it true for every older manager. And I think sometimes these younger people have a very keen understanding of sort of how remote work may affect like their own working style and the sort of tasks that they have to perform. Which I think in the case of managers are often more like social and interactive tasks, whereas for the people who are working under them, maybe it could be more introspective tasks. And I think this divide between the type of work that managers are doing and their employees are doing causes employees to favor remote work because it can be beneficial to those tasks, whereas managers might prefer in-person work because that's what helps them accomplish like their day-to-day duties.
I think that's a fair point. Yeah, to some extent, there is like you said, the type of task. Maybe it's correlated to introversion versus extroversion, or at least the sociability of the task at hand. I also think I would agree with you that it's not age dependent. It's more an indication of poor remote work management skills than it is age. But I would argue that beyond just the type of task that you mentioned, like. Younger managers can also fall privy to maybe being more comfortable with certain tools and looking at metrics. And again, that pitfall, I think that doesn't shield them from looking at the wrong metrics, kind of like we said with accounting for time and other, like how you count that time spent as opposed to being, say, results or product oriented. So to some extent, both can fall privy to the poor management skills. But even on the younger manager side, sometimes you'll see younger managers being very eager to use a certain tool, but without necessarily having that sort of foresight to look at, hey, what are we, just because it's easy to measure does not mean it's the right thing to measure, I think.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll see younger managers being eager. So to me, it's not a generational thing. It's more of a, again, kind of understanding of humans. So if we accept the premise that remote work is not absolutely evil, I guess based on our discussion, right?
I think it's a fair assessment, yeah.
It's not necessarily the holy grail either, but it's not pure evil. Do we feel like remote work has kind of forced companies to face an uncomfortable truth that there may be a lack of leadership skills in some cases where remote work has not worked? You know, it's not us, it's them, or maybe it's not them, it's us. I don't know.
I think the one thing I could say to this question is I think remote work pushes the need for especially growing leaders to address both the wins and the setbacks that that the team is facing at the moment, because we talked about the differences between remote work and you working in a shared room with other people. It's if you're physically in the presence of other people, it's easier to share things that come to mind and have everyone just organically converse with each other and share their thoughts and have a hopefully constructive conversation. But when you're working from home and the only mean of communication you have is through your laptop on Slack, for example, it's way easier for you to just not say anything. And especially as a leader, it's easier to pretend and tell yourself that things are going okay, but when things are not. And I think for some leaders, it's a good exercise for them to be able to sometimes reach out to a member on the team and tell them, hey, if there is something that maybe they're falling behind on, being able to kind of overcome the initial uncomfortableness to speak to them and try to find a solution together in a positive direction. You still have to kind of do that when working in person, but you're more inclined to say that because they're literally right there, and then you're kind of just not human if you don't say anything. So I think that's just a good thing for leaders to practice, is being able to just have the communication, have like the honest conversations as it is captured in one of our principles. So
I think I see it in the same way, maybe phrased differently in my words, but I think it's essentially fairly close to how you see it, where I think the remote work exacerbates lack of delegation skills, essentially. And because it can lead to what you were describing, where maybe you don't dare to reach out, and essentially you're starving your team for information that they might need to move forward. And then in the other extreme, you can lack delegation skills where you don't really know how to monitor, and then you end up in sort of a surveillance, drowning your team with a minutia of details that they don't necessarily need, like logs or report cards and so on to track. And so in both kind of those extremes, one of which I think is pretty much what you were just saying, it's that sort of lack of delegation capability. And so in a sense, I guess to answer my own question, lack of leadership skill that can come with that too, right?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you've kind of proposed the question. Yeah, I know you mentioned it was a loaded question, that why is remote work failing? But it's interesting to examine whether it is what failing really means. There are a lot of companies that are moving away from remote work, but I think the reasons that they're doing it aren't entirely rational. Like they're not, they don't have the data in front of them and they're going, oh, when we switched to remote work, we saw like revenue go down by 5%. And like, I think that a lot of the time it's driven by poor leadership skills could be one reason. Certainly kind of poor trust between managers, especially the upper level management of large companies. Oftentimes, I think that kind of the managers who directly interface with employees are more open to remote work than, say, the executives who are kind of mandating on high that all workers must return to office. Especially at these large companies, you don't see that the people who actually know what's going on and work with people on the ground who are doing the work, they're more permissive when it comes to working from home and hybrid work, I think. So sort of that like organizational fear from the higher ups. I think it is also, you spend a lot of money on an office and then it's empty. You go like, why did we spend all that money on the office if it's empty? We should fill it up with people. I think that it's a ridiculous premise, but it's what people do. And it's an easy trap to fall into when you've got an empty office that's costing you millions of dollars.
That's a very fair point. Yeah. So you already bought the building.
Got a parking lot that costs you millions of dollars. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, Pample doesn't own any buildings at the moment, so we're safe there.
Completely immune to that fallacy.
Exactly. For future employees, hey, you're starting in a good spot. But no, I think that was a good conversation, certainly. And I like that you brought up sometimes it is a lack of, there are other factors at play. It's not necessarily all logical, as much as it'd be nice if it were. So going to our next segment, Thanks Mom, where we're going to get 2 words from Mom, aka ChatGPT / also Eugene very shortly. We're going to get those 2 words and ideate whatever we can in 10 minutes. We'll cue a time lapse and we'll see if we can come up with anything interesting.
All right. Well, let's see what Mom has to come up with. Last week's prompt was very interesting. I'm very curious to see what this week's prompt will take us. Okay. So the prompt for this week will be chalk engine.
Chalk
engine.
The propulsion system we didn't know we needed.
Michael's going to kill this one.
I got this.
I'm a little concerned for myself, though. Let's see how this goes.
A healthy amount of scare, hopefully.
Here we go.
Cue time lapse. I think immediately as soon as I saw that, I wanted to take the prop route, and then I was thinking of in situ resourcialization and using local resources to make fuel. And I was like, well, there's nothing really new here, so let me try and go in other directions. And for some reason, I was thinking of those like World War II aerial smoke curtains that planes would sometimes drop, but from UAVs. So it's a bit light. It's on the chalk side. There's a light aerosolized chalk, and then engine, I guess, powered by the little UAV. I could see some defense application there, little smoke screens. Maybe you can go horizontal instead for a change, because now you're maybe more concerned with satellite imagery than you are necessarily the person next to you. But there could also be some sort of lateral battlefield obfuscation that could be interesting.
I was thinking chalk and engine. Chalk, I was thinking like a whiteboard, but like a blackboard. People use it to do write stuff. And engine, you can generate energy. But in this case, you're sort of already doing this with like interviews for people trying to get a job. But the idea here is that the chalk engine could be a method where you have in-person incubation sessions tailored for VCs that promote on-the-spot thinking and like holistic product development, where you just have a person with a whiteboard, or in this case, a blackboard, if you really want to lean to the chalk, and they're literally just like ideating on the spot, and you want to see like how well can they cover all sorts of all the different aspects of running a business, and like have they factored in all the principles if they're trying to create a product, like the engineering part, the business. Even when it comes down to the engineering, all the little like the power, if you need batteries for this thing, if you need, even just look at the regulatory requirements. Is this product designed for kids, and is this product like, can it work well for like the elderly as well too, or something like that? So that was kind of like the idea I was going for. So just on the spot thinking, VCs can, and this could be a way for VCs to maybe scout for like rising founders, or maybe new leadership for new companies. Just really get this person on the spot and be like, okay, let's see what this guy can do. And let's really get to see.
So it would be an interview method.
Or like
in a way. Yeah, so that's what I was saying. I don't know if this is, it's kind of being done in the recruiting world, but when it comes to VCs, I'm not sure if that's necessarily a thing. I mean,
a boot camp almost,
maybe.
Like more of a less, I guess maybe less recruiting, more training people.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, I also thought about blackboards when I heard chalk engine.
Nice.
So I instead thought about a problem that I face in my life, which is that some professors will, use a blackboard instead of like creating slides or like shareable notes online. So the chalk engine could be a piece of software. You could either run it like on a tripod, or on like, if the lecture is recorded but the notes aren't posted, it automatically generates like a PDF of what was written on the board, and it's annotated based on audio that accompanies it.
Oh, wow.
And one thing that would be very nice is if it could also use that audio to disambiguate some handwriting of professors. So like if the professor draws some unknowable Greek letter, but they say like, oh, this is zeta, then like it would automatically like create like a LaTeX version of the equation that has a zeta in it.
Okay.
So you'd have both the like reproduction of what was written, but also a like interpretation that's very nice and legible and well organized.
Yeah, that would have been useful in those classes where the professor turns around and says, are you finished copying? The answer is no, but they still erase it.
Oh yeah,
that would have been pretty clutch.
Absolutely. So it would just sort of, and there's even people at UCLA who are sort of like will volunteer to take notes for people who can't either like be there in person, or they may have some sort of disability that prevents them from taking their own notes. So this already exists. Like people are volunteering to do this now. So you could definitely come up with some sort of software that can hopefully do this well and on a scalable.
Yeah, that's cool. I like the idea.
What's interesting about this is that you already have, something similar to this is like on GoodNotes, I think, where you can write on your iPad, take notes, but then you could do like voice memos as well. But I feel like this might be like a step better just because you're getting it from the source. And like, I was just gonna say, like, there's times where I am sitting in the lecture hall watching this guy scribble on the white blackboard, and I'm just like, on my head, I'm like, what did this guy write? And that's just weighing on my mind 5 minutes.
Half
or
the
10
information
minutes.
is in what's being said. Half the information is what's on the board. So you have to like write down both and kind of weave the two together. So the chalk engine would put that work in for you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and you spend less time just trying to write everything down, but you spend more time just being engaged with the material. So
Exactly.
it could improve, academic performance overall.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I like it.
Yeah.
Maybe we can tie it into my other chalk engine idea too, which is a bit different, but I was thinking engine more like a search engine kind of base, and chalk in the sense of annotation. I'm just thinking you can use chalk to annotate things. Something more of an AI tool that would basically, if you feed it a document, can annotate things to watch out for. Not necessarily like finding quotes or anything like that, like you might in a book, but you could have a contract like, hey, here's some legal terms that are in there you might watch out for, or here's some contradictory terms in this statement. So maybe it could be for, I'm picturing contracts, for example, where you have a reason to be kind of careful with what's in there, something a little more high stakes like that. So chalk engine could be that kind of little tool that points out inconsistencies.
Especially if it's trained on like what's sort of par for the course, because as an individual, you don't know whether this is sort of like standard contract language, if this is very like permissive or it's very strict in very peculiar ways.
Yeah. Or even if you're, say, an engineer at a bigger company and like you don't necessarily own the contracting manual of what's okay or not okay in the company, but as an engineer, you still have to get on contract with a vendor. And so you can kind of look at the terms and be like, hey, watch out, the terms that either you're proposing or maybe your vendors are proposing are not...
would violate this other contract.
Exactly, yeah. So you don't have to navigate the rules and go to, chapter 7, subsection C, subsection D. You can kind of have that call it out a little bit for you, kind of trained on your internal documents. Would be useful.
Yeah, I think so. All right, so the other idea I had was this would be like a kid's toy, or if an adult wants to use it, they can use it too. I was thinking a toy car that you can insert like a stick of chalk into, and then you could draw stuff on the ground. I thought it would just be fun, like a little novel thing that people can play with. But what I came up with after the fact was that I was thinking this could be like your own DIY IRL in real life version of like Tron, the video game, where you have light bikes, and like, so essentially you have like these RC cars you can drive. You have a stick, and you can a stick of chalk, but you can have different colors. So what you can do is that have each car, like, they would just create their own colored line. And then, if people are familiar with the game Tron, and there's a movie that's going to be coming out soon in 2025, or no, some years later, I'm sorry. Like, if your opposing car hits the line that you created, then like they're dead. So they're out the game.
Yeah.
So maybe this might be a little fun game. Some kids can just go out there. It could be a fun summer activity. Or even, I could see this maybe just be a recreational art where people just have a collection of RC cars and everyone just makes their own line
Sort
art.
of like a drone show, but on the ground.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, that might be really interesting. I mean, it's just, you could maybe play your own version of Snake too if you wanted with this thing too.
That could be a fun, like, sort of game that's in person now too. It's kind of fun to have that dimension of like, it's not just virtual, but there is like an actual thing moving there.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Let's see. I had two other ones.
I've got two more also.
Oh, perfect.
Quick one. So there are certain types of running shoes that are interestingly banned in competition because even though they're completely passive, they provide too much of a competitive edge. So I was sort of thinking like, chalk, it's sort of like hopscotch, like jumping, running. So I'm like, well, what if while these shoes are banned in competition, what if you just lean into it as much as possible? And
you just the extreme
you
shoe.
create a shoe that, it's very springy, it's totally passive, but it allows you to run faster, maybe jump higher, or it's just sort of like fun to get around. Like those wheelies, for example. So it's sort of like a alternate version of that. That's just meant for like running fast for the sake of getting places more quickly, or for the sake of having fun.
Parkour meets hopscotch. That's what's going on in my head, and it's pretty epic. I would support that.
So there might be some way you can mechanically turn it on or off. So it can be like a normal shoe, but then you can adjust something mechanically, and it becomes very springy and is great for running around.
Maybe for a fun TV show, actually.
I was gonna say I could see this being a really fun Red Bull competition kind of thing, where you just get everyone who wants to participate, just have them try to design the most like crazy shoe that can get someone as fast as they can from one point to another. I remember seeing like a while ago, like there's shorts where it's like you have this really thin like platform that people have to ride a bike across to reach the finish line, and people come up with the wackiest designs and stuff like that. So I could totally see something that like this could be a creative competition, a friendly competition where people really push the envelope of like what makes a shoe, and
Yeah.
it'd be really crazy. Yeah.
We'll tag Red Bull in this one. See if they respond.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, it's kind of thinking of performance too. I was gonna go in a bit of a different direction too. But when you're at the gym, whether rock climbing gym or just like a nice regular gym, and you're lifting, you often need chalk for your little power sessions there. So I was thinking, chalk engine could be a machine that essentially you maybe give your chalk like a scent, maybe a consistency, because you have liquid chalk, you have powder chalk, and maybe you can go somewhere in between where liquid's not good enough, but the other one is just too, maybe, I don't know, grainy, or it's just not the right texture. And so a little chalk engine could essentially kind of like grind it there for you, package it in a little thing, and be like, oh, here. This is
it's like a vending machine in the gym.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of on the spot, you're like, hey, I want it mango scented, and I want to be half liquid, half, dry chalk. And maybe that's the optimal mix for that powerlifting competition,
I also thought about chalk as in, you put it on your hands when you go climbing at the gym or when you're lifting weights. And so I kind of went that direction. I was thinking of maybe, this is something that probably exists, but more like almost like intelligent python when you're climbing. So like the advantage of the system would be like it can automatically like clamp onto either, if you place it into say like a crack, it can like expand so that it like firmly wedges itself in automatically without any need for a hammer. Or you could place it maybe even on a jug, and it would like be able to fold itself and really clamp on tightly, whether it's like concave or convex surface. And also it would help like protect you if you fall. I know that there's climbing rope that disperses the energy of falls, but it could maybe intelligently like slowly decelerate you instead of quickly decelerate you if you are to fall.
Okay.
And maybe you could even have some sort of like remote so that you like pass your python, and instead of having to go back and retrieve it, you can have it unclamp, and then it would fall down, and then you could reel it back in, or maybe you could climb up the rope. Like it has little wheels that it can
it moves for you. It comes back down.
And that way you could just have like two of them, and you can automatically like pull one back and then put it ahead of you, and then the old one could move up, and you kind of leapfrog with them.
Yeah, it just comes off. You don't have to like go back up and then top rope back down with your buddy. Yeah. Nice. That could be cool. I like the idea where it like self-motorizes and then takes care of itself.
Yeah.
Let's see. The last one I had, a bit of a different direction. I was wondering, so it's kind of more on the literal engine side, and think of like, well, chalk, like what could it be? Could be maybe like a condensate or something. And I was thinking maybe there's some applications where you have a combustion engine, essentially maybe the electric version doesn't exist, or you don't want to have nuclear. And maybe it could be a device that converts your exhaust. Essentially, it would go in like a condenser so that gas coming out gets condensated into maybe either a liquid, or it could maybe also be a form of solid, depending on what it is. So that becomes sort of the chalk aspect. Why might you want to do that? Maybe there's some like environmental protection laws if you're in certain reserves, or you're doing certain scientific studies where you don't want your passage to start, implementing certain chemicals in the area that you're in. So maybe that could be one way, like you essentially retrofit with like the ultimate tailpipe, I guess. I just condensate everything. You have zero emissions. Easier said than done, because you got to watch back pressures and stuff like that. But that could be like maybe almost like going through a bubbler, but the bubbler catches everything.
That is interesting. Yeah, there are some systems that store their own propellants, like torpedoes, for instance, but that's a property of the chemicals they use are actually like the volume is smaller after they react. So it'd be interesting to see what system could be made for like any combustion engine.
Exactly. Something you could retrofit where you still have the benefit of the power. I mean, you would sacrifice some power, I guess, by virtue of appending something to the system, but you would still get to leverage an existing vehicle, but just convert in such a way that you're able to take away the trace. Maybe it could be some applications there.
Interesting.
All right. Well, that's all I think we had for Thanks Mom in this segment. We hope that you've enjoyed listening to this episode, and if you feel strongly about remote work, or if you'd like to share your own experiences about whether you prefer to be in person at work, well, in person, remote, or both, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts on leadership and what that looks like with sort of the current options that we have available when it comes to working. So thanks for listening in, and we'll see you all in the next one.
See you in the next one.
See ya.